Hey everyone, welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. Today is day 63. So we are a little over 2 months in, and we are in the book of Numbers. Before I give sort of my background that I always give, I just want to let you know that, so normally I come in here and I don't necessarily have an agenda. I have certain things that I want to talk about based on the reading. I write down notes. I always sort of like follow up and things that sort of interest me and verses that stand up to my attention. But I don't really consider myself an apologist. And so I don't necessarily have like these points that I want to hit to prove to you guys certain things. And I'm saying this because today I have 2 points that I want to spend a little bit of time on in the reading. And they come down to kind of typical questions that are asked. And so just kind of giving you a heads up on the things I'm going to go over. One of them is the Bible literal? And the second point I'm going to focus on is God fair? And I think those are two big things that both inside and outside the church that we have concerns about. Because if it's not literal, then for some people, what's the point? For other people, they're comfortable that it's not literal because then they can just use it as guidelines for their life. And I'm hoping today that both of those views kind of leave something to be desired. And then, is God fair? Obviously, is another really tough question that I think that, especially as we as believers, we answer to that question a lot, because how can it be fair that someone dies for something, or how can it be fair that I have to follow somebody's rules? Who are you to say whether that is good or bad? And so these are kind of heavy topics. And I'm saying that because I think they both came up pretty strong in the reading today. And so I just wanted to sort of brace you a little bit in advance that I'm going to be going into those. And those are sort of heavy hitting topics I'm going to hit. And I don't know how much I'm going to get to other things, because those are going to be my primary focus. So, but it goes along with the reading. I'm not pulling them out of nowhere. It's not something I just had a conversation with someone about, but those I think are pretty strong in the reading, which is why I'm always hard-headed about people reading their Bible, because I think this is your foundation to how you live every day of your life. Okay, so today is day 63, March 3rd on your calendar. If you are still going by, you started on January 1st, and we are reading Numbers 14 and 15. And so if you get my very short overview, if you followed along every day, you kind of know exactly where we are. If you have not, and this is your first recording, if this is the first time you've been with me, then I would love if you would go back to Genesis 1 to kind of get that background. But if you want to stick with it, it's great, but maybe go back to Exodus. And so just to get a brief overview, but I'm going to give you a very teeny tiny short overview of who the people are and where they are. So we are with Moses and Aaron. They are brothers. And God has saved the Israelites they were in several hundred years of slavery. God has saved them and pulled them out of slavery. They have gone to the base of Mount Sinai, which is the mountain of God, where Moses spoke with God. God now is meeting with his people in the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, which is sort of God's house. And he has the Levites doing all the heavy hitting with the holy items. So they're carrying all the holy items from one place to another. They built the ark where God comes and he speaks to Aaron and his sons. And now they are at the point where and he developed sort of an entire community based on God and his holiness. And so all of these sort of rules and regulations that he has, which I kind of always air quote them because I just hate calling them rules and regulations, but they are rules and regulations in order to be in the presence of a holy God. And now they are traveling to they pick up the entire community and of more than 1 million people, 1.5 million probably. The entire community picks up and it moves on towards the land of Canaan. And this is the land of milk and honey. This is the land that God has promised to the Israelite people. And I'm starting this out because now I'm going to say to you, there are currently people living there. So God has promised this to the Israelites. This is a land that God promised to Abraham hundreds of years ago, about, let's say, 500 years ago, maybe a little bit more. But in that neighborhood of 500 years ago, he told Abraham, as Abraham was walking through, he said, this is the land I'm going to give to your descendants. and they are going to live here, and this is my land. So it's God's land. It's not actually the Israelites' land, it's God's land. And he's going to move his people into this land, and they are going to live and dwell there. And it is the land of milk and honey. It is God's land. It's a beautiful place to be. So, but again, there are currently people that are living there. And so last we got together, which was yesterday, if you were with me yesterday, people went in and they looked to see what it looked like. All right. So we're going to move on from there. We are now in Numbers 14. In Numbers 14, so people remember, so they went in, they looked at it, they were there for 40 days. And then they came out and they told the people that the land was amazing. They came back with grapes, and they came back with pomegranates, and they came back with so grapes and pomegranates and figs. So they came back with this luscious fruit that they had not had for a couple of years, and because they were eating manna that God provided for them. And but they said the people are really, really big. They are. So there are Canaanites in there, and there are other people in there. I think Hezronites, something like that. There are other people in there, and one of them was the children of Anak, and so these were the children of the Nephilim. So they were giant people. They were mighty warriors, and they were very scary. And so they were afraid. They said, "We're not going back in there." And then Caleb said, "We can do this." And so we're going to see what happens to Caleb, but he said basically that we can do this, and then everyone else is whining and complaining. So this is where we start. We start in verse 1, Numbers 14. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. So they're all whining. All the Israel, and again, when I say this, I want to say this cautiously, because they did go in there, and the Nephilim were in there, and so or the sons of the Nephilim, the Anaks were in there, the Anakites probably they're called. They were in there, and they were mighty warriors, and so I'm sure they were like, we don't have as many people as they do. They said their cities were fortified. They have plenty to eat, so it's not like they could block them in, thinking of some kind of strategy with war. So it is scary. And the reality is no matter what they did, they needed God. They couldn't walk in and do this on their own. And so they were fearful. They are humans, and they were scared. But God has promised them this land. And so I'm saying this because when God promises you something, you have faith that his promise is true. His promise is real. So, verse 2, it says, all the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if we had only died in Egypt or in the wilderness, why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? So they're really assuming that they're going to die in this area. And so I want to go to verse 4, where it says, and they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Okay, so this is sort of my first point. Choose a leader and go back to Egypt. So you have these two choices. So I think about my life, and this is what made me think of, is the Bible true? Okay, so we have two choices here. We can choose to stay and follow God, or we can get somebody new and we can go back and be slaves. Follow God, who created the universe, go back and be slaves. As the reader, here I am. So I want to also be careful, and I let you know this is around, I think, 1880 BC. So this was just about 4,000 years ago. 4,000 years ago. This was a really, 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 it's about 1400, between 14 and 1200 BC. So still, I mean, it's a ridiculous amount of time long ago. And so I'm a reader, and I've learned all of these things, right? I went to church, and my pastor taught me all of these things that I'm supposed to understand. And so I say, of course I would choose God. I would never choose go back to Eve. I would never choose that. But there is that reality for me every single day. I can choose to follow God, whose commands are hard, or I can go back to my slavery of being away from God. And I'm saying this because it's a hard choice, I think, to make. Because so if I'm thinking in the mind of an Israelite, right? If I go and I try to fight against these really strong people, there's a really good chance I'm going to die. Maybe I'm not going to die. Maybe I'm going to lose a leg. Maybe I'm not going to lose a leg. Maybe I'm going to get gutted. Right? Maybe my husband will die in the war. Right? So there are a whole bunch of different things that could happen to me. Right? So there's that very serious reality. If I go back to Egypt, I am fed every day. I have a job. So I have a job and a purpose. I have demands on me every day. And my family is spared from, having to go to war and having to protect certain things, having to, right, because they were slaves. And so they weren't on the front lines of battle. They were doing hard labor for the people that lived in Egypt. And so if I wrap my mind around it, I say the easier of the two choices, right? The least amount of risk in my mind is to go back to Egypt, because in Egypt I knew what I had. There was safety there, and I knew that. It might not have been great, but I knew that there was safety. Here is a huge unknown to me. And all I've been told is that I have to follow God. I haven't talked to God. But I know Moses keeps telling me to follow God. So I'm going to find a new leader that's going to take me back to my comfort zone, the things that I'm comfortable in. All right. So I think this is a very difficult choice. And I think anytime we're introduced to something new that God is asking us to do, the plan that He has in store for us, right? This is an opportunity that I can take to be a part of God's kingdom. And a lot of times I say, that step, I'm not ready for that step. Can I just go back and not do any of those things? Can I just go back and kind of sit at my desk and just read on my own, and not have to go meet new people, not have to speak about you? What if I don't have the right answers, right? Like there's so many risks involved in following God. But He promises that He will turn His face towards you. This is His blessing to us, is He's going to turn His face towards us. His light is going to shine upon us. But time after time after time, we choose slavery. And so I want to make that a deeper understanding. Now, this is the real issue for me. The real issue for me is, was this real? Right? And so this is where I want to get into my sort of an understanding of what is and isn't true. And I say that because, remember, I'm telling you, it's like 14 to 1200, right? So it's a really, really long time ago. We don't necessarily have a huge amount of artifacts from that time that can prove that Moses existed and did what he did, right? And so I know there are people now who say that it is all allegory, right? So this isn't allegory. This is just a story that was told to the Israelite community so they would follow the rules. All right. So, and then, of course, if it was just told to the Israelite community so they would follow the rules, then in turn, the story is actually not true for us either. And it is just an allegory for us to do exactly what I just said, right? Am I going to follow God, or am I going to go into slavery? Am I going to do the right thing, or am I going to do the wrong thing? Right. So it's just an allegory. It's just saying, make good decisions, right? Be a good person. And that's actually not what this is about at all. And I'm saying that for a lot of reasons. One, because they are very detailed in this historical information, right? They tell you all the events that occurred, when they occurred, and why they occurred, right? So how they built the tabernacle for the first time. And remember, well, maybe not remember because it's moving a little bit forward, but things from the tabernacle, those plans sort of continue on into the future. And one of the things that He consistently says is, He says, I am the Lord your God that took you out of Egypt. There is a reminder in here so you know that the God that literally took the people out of Egypt is the God that you serve. Why would I follow God? Because God took me out of Egypt. Why would I choose not to be enslaved to my own sin? Because God took me out of Egypt. right? Not metaphorically took me out of Egypt, made me a better person, made me feel better about myself, because the God who created the universe took these people that were enslaved, saved them, picked them up, and moved them. This story for us is in some ways a historical document to understand why we would choose to follow God over following ourselves, right? So, why would we make that decision every single day? Sometimes those decisions do not sit with what the world is doing, right? And then, how do I justify that? And I know I did this a couple of weeks ago, sort of like the good and the bad. And this is sort of that same idea of remembering that the God that I choose, the reason why I don't turn back to whatever it is that I was already doing. So the reason that I don't turn away from God is because God saved these people out of Egypt. He saved a real people in a real time. So this is not an allegory for my life to choose good or to choose bad. This is a real story for my life about a real being that did real things. And so then I look to him and I say, you're the one who did this, and therefore I'm going to do what you asked me to do. So I kind of feel like a broken record a little bit in this, but I want to make it really clear, because I think um, we're more erring on the side of what to do, and like, oh, those people were so ridiculous that they would want to turn away. Why would they ever want to turn away from the God? We do it all the time. We do it every day of our lives. We almost always choose what's easier for us than what is right. And by what is right, I mean what is right by God's standards. So we always choose what feels good, what feels easy, what won't lose friendships, what won't cause problems in any of my relationships, versus what God challenges me to do in a very real way. All right. So anyway, so I want to just move on a little bit from there. So that was kind of like one of my big points, but I want to keep talking about this because this is what these people did, right? They were like, let me choose slavery. Let me choose and go back to slavery. So in verse 8, it says, if the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land. This is I'm going to move back a little bit because this is Caleb talking, right? He says, the land that we passed through, the land that we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, which he's not going to be if they turn back, if he's pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. And so the other thing I wanted to note was it says that their protection is gone. And so in some ways, this was the moment where God protected them from not the Israelites, the people who are currently living in the land of milk and honey, in the land of Canaan. And now he has taken his protection away from them, and he has put his protection on the Israelites, on his people. And so that's another tough one. All right. And so in verse 10, it says the whole assembly talks about stoning them. So the whole assembly was going to stone Moses and Aaron. And then the glory of the Lord appeared, and he wants to punish them. So these people want to blame Moses for everything. And instead of remember that God has made Moses sort of his mouthpiece, right? He's the leader and he's his mouthpiece. And so instead of actually following what Moses, their leader, is saying, they want to stone him and they want to turn away from him. And then God threatens to strike everybody down, even though he should have, but God wants to strike everybody down. He doesn't, because Moses intercedes for them. So again, I really think there's some power in intercession in the leaders of our Christian community. There are powers to intercede for the people who maybe don't know, aren't as deep in their faith with the Lord as some others. All right, so I want to read 17 and 18. Now may the Lord's strength be displayed just as you have declared. The Lord, this is Moses talking to God. The Lord is slow to anger. So this is some of the traits of God. He's slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. In accordance with your great love, forgive the sin of these people, just as you have pardoned them from the time they left Egypt until now. So Moses is interceding on their behalf, um, sort of reaching back to God and reminding, maybe reminding is the wrong word, reminding of God who he is. God knows who he is, but letting God know that his greatness and his goodness and what he has promised the people. And God does forgive them. However, they are now going to wander for 40 years, and that generation is going to die off. So everybody who whined and complained is going to die off, and they are not going to land in, they're not going to go into the land of milk and honey. So if I read verse 24, it says, but because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. Since the Amalekites and Canaanites are living in the valleys, turn back tomorrow and set out toward the desert along the route to the Red Sea. So he is telling them now, you guys have to, so they have sort of, they've been like looking directly at the, Canaan. So they're kind of like ready to go in. And he says, now it's done. Now you guys have to turn around, head back the other way. And the only ones who are going to survive this are Caleb and Joshua. So they're going to be the people that, and then anyone 20 and under. So he really says that 20 to 60 range are the ones that are sort of doomed to die. They're the ones that whined are the ones that are doomed to die in the wilderness. And then the others are going to be let in. So those next generations are going to inherit the land of milk and honey because their parents refused to do what God told them to do. So they were told to turn back, and then they don't. So verse 29, it says, in the wilderness, your bodies will fall, every one of you, 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. So I don't know if that's everybody. He specifically says not Caleb, right? So he specifically keeps Caleb out of it. We eventually see that Joshua also stays out of it. I don't know if every single person grumbled against them, if that was a literal expression or if that was a not necessarily metaphorical, but saying like everyone, sort of a large majority, a big group. But everyone who has whined or grumbled against him is going to die. And so, except Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, son of Nun. So those are the two that are going to continue, and they're going to move into the land of Canaan. So moving in, the people decided that they were going to, so the people did a funny thing. They decided that they were going to, I don't know, try and garner his favor. And they were sort of like, it reminds me of when like a little kid is like, no, you say, do your work, and they don't. And then they say, okay, your video games are gone. And the kid goes, no, okay, no, I'll do it now. That's what the sort of image makes me think of, because I have kids. And so they go back up over into that area and they say, no, now we trust you. We're going to go into the land. And they're told, don't go into that land. You're going to be overtaken. You're not going to win now. God is no longer with you guys. He's no longer favoring you. He's told you guys that you have to go back into the wilderness. And so they wind up going into the land and they wind up dying from it. When God makes up his mind, we have to be careful that he is settled in it. With, and you see time and time again where you can see Moses prays for them, right? So he was going to annihilate them and he didn't, because Moses prayed for them. That is not what happened in the situation. The situation was they just went, and they hoped that when they went that God was going to be on their side, and he wasn't. They didn't pray about it. They didn't ask for it. They didn't repent. They didn't do any of those things. So they went up dying from it. All right. So I want to move on to Numbers 15. Verse 1, it says, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, after you enter the land I'm giving you as a home, present food offerings and all these other things. So and then it moves into all the things that you need to set up. So it says food offerings, burnt off, and it says whether. So these food offerings, you're going to present them to the Lord as a sweet aroma, right? Sweet aroma to the Lord. They can be burnt offerings, sacrificial offerings, special vow offerings, free will offerings, or festival offerings. And then you're going to add a grain offering. And then I thought this was really neat. You're now going to add a drink offering. And I'm assuming that you're adding a drink offering, which we haven't seen up to this point, was because now they were in an area where they had grapes. And so they didn't have grapes before. So now they have grapes, and now they are required to offer a drink offering anytime they offer any other offerings. And then from verses 6 to 12, it just essentially breaks down a little bit what the offerings are supposed to look like, how much is supposed to be in those things. And then it says all the native borns are supposed to do it. So everybody that is an Israelite by birth. And then everyone that is a foreigner that is living in their land. So again, the foreigners, and I know I've talked about this before, the foreigners are treated equally to the native born. And it makes me think of, and I know I've mentioned this before, so when the foreigners are outside the land, it's different. But when they are the land of the Israelites, they are treated exactly like the Israelites, and they are supposed to follow all of the exact same things as the Israelites. So it's this idea of, and I think our faith is much the same, like Christianity. And I don't want to say our faith as if it's different from this, but this is before Christ came. Our faith is much the same. Jesus lovingly, openly welcomes everybody to the table, right? So he says, I love all of you sinners, all of you broken, all of you unloved, right? So he offers this to everybody, anyone and everyone. He offers himself to. When you come to the table, when you are a foreigner and you want to come and you want to join Jesus, you have to follow Jesus. It is no longer about being a foreigner and doing what foreigners do, right? It is now being in the land of Israelites and doing what the Israelites do. Because now you are in the presence of God and you act like it. And so it's this same visual. I have the hardest time when we say we follow Jesus and we don't actually follow Jesus. And I'm not saying it as if it's easy. I'm recognizing the challenge of following Jesus. And for anyone who says, oh, no, it's easy. It's just an easy faith. It's a simple faith. It's no big deal. I'm probably going to challenge you that you might not genuinely be following him the way that he wants you to follow him, because it is harder than we think it is. But he's asking us to do that. Come to the table and follow me as I am. I accept you as you are, and then I want you to be holy like me. So same thing, foreigners, and I'm bringing this up again, foreigners come into Israel. They are wholeheartedly accepted. They are not treated like different people. Come in, acclimate yourself to the land of the Israelites, and become like one of them. Follow their festivals, follow their burnt offerings, follow all of their rules and their laws and their guidelines, right? It is the exact same thing. So you come in as a foreigner and you live as an Israelite. If you want to go live as a foreigner, you have to live as a foreigner outside, not with the Israelites in the Israelite camp. So, but they openly accept you, and it's different. It's not like you live in this pocket of the land and you act this way, and then you live at this pocket of the land, you act this way. It's all the same thing. You live in Israel, you live like an Israelite, which I think is a good thing. It's a blessing. They're fully accepting you, not making you any different. Okay, so then we come to these offerings, and this is kind of another area that I think is really interesting. So we start coming to, I'm going to read verse 15. All right. This might be still the native thing. All right, so 15 is the community is to have the same rules. This is the community is to have the same rules for you and for the foreigner residing among you. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. You and the foreigner shall be the same before the Lord. Awesome. Okay, moving on to 17. The Lord says to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land which I am taking you to, and you eat the food of the land, present a portion as an offering to the Lord, a loaf first, and then he kind of moves on from there. Now, verse 22, if it was a community unintentionally fails to keep any of these commands the Lord Moses gave, any of the commands that you have through him from the day the Lord gave them and continuing through generations to come, and if this is done unintentionally without the community being aware of it, then the whole community is to offer a young bull. So these are we talked about this back in Leviticus. These are unintentional breaking of the laws, right? So I unintentionally broke the law. When I unintentionally break the law, whether it be through a bull or whatever you do to unintentionally break the law, right? You took from your neighbor or whatever it is, you unintentionally broke it. You didn't deliberately do it. It was unintentional. And then you have to go. So if you do it as a community, which it happens as a community, it also happens as a single person. And whatever you do, you then have to go and you have to offer things up to the Lord, right? So we kind of have that. We saw that a little bit. We see that a little bit more now. So the follow-up to this is if you intentionally do it, you are cut off from your people, and you are, so I'm going to go in verse 30, actually verse 27. Verse 27 says, but if just one person sin, nope, that's one person unintentionally. 30, it says, but if anyone who sins defiantly, whether native born or foreigner, blasphemes the Lord, so you're against the Lord, and must be cut off from the people of Israel, because they have despised the Lord's word and broken his commands, they must surely be cut off, and their guilt remains on them. If you intentionally sin, if you intentionally break any of these rules that he gives you, you are cut off from your people. You're no longer allowed to live with them anymore. You have broke essentially covenant with God. You, on your side, you broke it because you intentionally sinned against the God of the universe. So I want to be very clear. It is very important. Most of these things they consider unintentional sins. And then there's this big one that if it's intentional, you blaspheme and you are removed from the community. Then we say, we're going to move on because here comes an example. What does that look like? So what do you mean by that? What does that look like? Well, here's an example, verse 32. While the Israelites were in the wilderness, a man was found gathering wood on the Sabbath. What is the Sabbath? The Sabbath is their day of rest. So this is sort of that like fair, unfair thing that I was talking about in the very beginning. The Sabbath is their day of rest. So what do they do to this guy? So he is supposed to not be working. He is absolutely 100. He's been told, he knows this is a commandment. This is what they've been doing as a community. And they find this guy gathering wood, sorry. And then those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly, and they kept him in custody because it wasn't clear what they should do. So, okay, we see he's intentionally working on the Sabbath. What are we supposed to do with it? The Lord said to Moses, the man must die. The whole assembly must stone him outside the camp. So the assembly took him outside of the camp and they stoned him to death. Is that fair? Is that right? Is God a good God or a bad God? When you open your Bible, you open it up and you look at it and you go, I'm not supposed to be doing this. I'm not supposed to be doing that. I'm not supposed to be doing this, right? And then you intentionally do it. First of all, we're not killed automatically. And so there's grace and blessing in that. Well, maybe not blessing. I feel like that's the wrong word, but there's definitely grace in that. But what happened here? Why is it so different here? Is that right? God's kind of messed up. He was just, this is why people say, I don't follow the God of the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament killed everybody. He was mean. He brought down lightning on people. And we saw this not that long ago too with Aaron's two sons. Remember, they were sort of smited, set in flames when they came to the altar in the wrong way. And so we see all these really extreme examples of God taking very severe action against people who break his laws. So what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that have to say about God? And I want to be fair with you, because I think I have a vision now in my life, 15 years as a believer, that I never would have had when I first read this. When I first read this, I would have probably either pretended it really didn't happen, or I would have, again, separated the Old Testament God from the New Testament God, which is Jesus. And I would say, well, that one was mean, but now, well, good news, we can do whatever we want. He has laid this foundation out. Okay. So he created the system. He laid this foundation out. And then somebody blatantly breaks that rule. Is God just or unjust? God saved this man, and this man decided that what God told him didn't really apply to him. Is God just or unjust? I feel like if we had to put it down on paper, we would have to admit that God is just. God saved them, said, you are now my people. You are going to follow me. I am holy, and you are going to do what is holy in order to be in my presence. And if not, you're gone. This guy didn't do that. Now, it feels terrible, right? Like, so, like I said, if I'm logical, I can go, I get it. And not only do I get it, then I say to myself, why doesn't he do that to me? How come I absolutely blatantly break a lot of things that Jesus asks me to do. Why doesn't he do this to me? Is he just or is he unjust? And I'm going to say he has given me more grace than I deserve, right? Maybe he has a plan for me that extends beyond this. Maybe he doesn't need to make the point right now to his people, um, for me to be fun. Maybe he needs to show me more grace in order to allow me to develop more in faith, whatever it might be. I don't know why, but I know that he is just. And again, I believe in my heart that he is just because of all the things that he's already done, because he destroyed Pharaoh in order to save the people that he promised that he would save. Because he promised them, if you guys remember, if you've been with me for so long, if you remember in Genesis, he promised, he said to, I think it was to Joseph, he said, um, your people are going to be shut down for 400 years, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to save them, right? They're going to be slaves to other people, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to save them and I'm going to make them my people. So he promised that he was going to do this, and then he delivered. And he delivered in a really big way. And he delivered so everybody there knew who God was and then knew who God's people were, right? So he didn't just do it even for himself, which a lot of us go, whoa, God needs everyone to think he's so important. No, what God what God is doing is he's showing the world that his people are holy, so they turn to him. And when they turn to him, there's protection there, and there's blessing there, and there's love there that is not anywhere else in this world. You are not going to get any kind of perfect love and justice from anyone except God. It just doesn't exist. And I've been on both sides. And I have super loving parents, and I have a really really great family, and we love each other, and we're kind, and we're good to each other, and we do really good things for each other. It is not God's love. It is just a different creature, right? So God's love is bigger and better than all of those things. And so that's the God that I want to follow, even when I see things like this that says, he carried wood on a Sunday. Oh, it was a Saturday. He carried wood on a Saturday. How can that be wrong? He blatantly blasphemed the God that saved him out of Egypt 2 years ago. It was only 2 years ago. The God that comes down in a cloud, a pillar of cloud, and then comes, and then at night is in a pillar of fire. The God that shows up to them every single day. The God that keeps their community together, right? That God, he said, I don't really need to follow that one. So I want you as the listener to pull that into your hearts and just to think to yourself, have I blasphemed that God? What does that mean? How can I thank God for not smiting me or telling people to stone me? Right? So what does that mean to my life? And then how moving forward can I be more honoring of that God? And then the one thing that he does after that, so sort of finishing up, but moving on a little bit to this, the one thing that he does is he gives them a way to remind them. So this is sort of all connected, although I think in my Bible it's separated, and maybe in most Bibles it is. I think this is all a unit. So he gives them the hard line of where he says this is what is going to happen. He shows the example of how it happens, of how someone blatantly disregards his laws and breaks them and sins, and then he says, so you don't do this, you add these tassels to your clothes, and these tassels are going to remind you every day of all of the laws and the rules that we have. And so if you go, oh my gosh, how could I possibly remember all those things? You have these reminders. So they lived in a world where there were these reminders all the time of all the things that they were supposed to do. God was not unfair. He did not give them rules without justice. He did not even give them a way to not understand. He fully gave them a plan to understand these rules, to follow these rules, to remember these rules, and then to remember who sent them, right? So who gave them and what that God did. Remember, I am the God who saved you in Egypt. All right, and then I just want to read this verse 39, because we're right near the end here. Verse 39 says, you will have these tassels to look at, so you will remember all the commands of the Lord, that you may obey them. And then this is a great word, and not prostitute yourselves by chasing after the lusts of your own heart and eyes. Big word, prostituting yourself, giving yourself up for things that aren't good for you, right? Selling your body for these lusts that are meaningless, right? They are not God honoring, they are not worthy, they are meaningless. And so the more you sell your body to that, the more of a prostitute you are. And so he's saying, I don't want you to be unclean. I don't want you to sell yourself. These things are not good for you. And so he reminds them with the tassels on them. And then he finishes up by saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. Do not forget. That's all. I went crazy long today, but there were definitely some things I wanted to hit on. So I appreciate if you stuck with me. This might have been breaking up into two. Uh, if you like it, please hit the like button, share it, subscribe to the channel, and keep reading. I'll see you next time.